A very good afternoon to you from the studios of Atlantic Television Network in Port Harcourt. This is ATN International News. To begin, let's take a look at the biggest stories making the headlines today. 13 migrants' bodies found on Mediterranean coast in Tunisia. Fighting rocks Sudan's Khartoum amid cholera outbreak. Alabama executes second nitrogen gas execution. Hurricane Helene hits U.S., Florida, and Georgia. Gold mine collapses after landslide, killing 15 in Indonesia. South African cabinet to forge positive ties with Japan. 72 Americans on trial as alleged Ukraine mercenary in Russia. These and many more stories to come your way in a moment. Do stay with us. And now on the news in details, we delve into Africa. Bodies of 13 migrants from sub-Saharan Africa were found washed up on Tunisia's Mediterranean coast this week as authorities struggle to stem unauthorized boat crossings from North Africa to Europe. Africa near Mahdia, near Lampedusa, Italy. Tunisia and Libya are key launching pads for migrants, with thousands reaching Lampedusa annually via ramshackle boats. An investigation is underway to determine their origins. Tens of thousands of migrants from Bangladesh make the dangerous journey. Earlier in September, 5 bodies were recovered near Monastir, Tunisia, including that of a woman and a child. Recently, Tunisia upped efforts to patrol its territorial waters with European funding and help, leading to a drop in migrants' crossings and deaths. Tunisia's National Guard reported a decrease in migrant arrivals in Italy from Tunisia in the first half of 2023, with around 10,000 migrants arriving by boat from Tunisia in the first half of this year, largely due to preventive measures taken by Tunisian, Libyan, and Turkish authorities. Unauthorized migration to European Union countries has decreased this year, but a surge in Canary Island migrants has been observed due to tightened Mediterranean border and maritime security. The have risen between migrants, Tunisians, and security forces in encampments along the Tunisian coastline. A regional court in East Africa opened proceedings on Thursday in a case filed by Congo against neighboring Rwanda, accusing it of violating Congo's sovereignty and territorial integrity by sending troops to help rebels in the country's east. Eastern Congo has struggled with armed violence as more than 120 groups fight for power, land, and valuable mineral resources, while others try to defend their communities. Some armed groups have been accused of mass killings. Congo alleges that Rwandan forces have been involved in aggression and war crimes in the east. In July, UN experts estimated that between 3,000 and 4,000 Rwanda government are making major advances. The East African Court of Justice, based in Arusha, Tanzania, was established as a regional court under a 1999 treaty among a group of East African nations and is meant to hear cases from Kenya, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. The court has been ratified by the United Nations. The proceedings came a day after Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi called for sanctions against Rwanda at the UN General Assembly, alleging it supports the M23 rebels in the restive eastern region. In the lawsuit, Congo seeks to hold Rwanda accountable for violations including atrocities against civilians and breaches of international law, and also secure reparations for the victims of these alleged crimes. The lawsuit underscores the long-running tensions between the two countries, particularly over the mineral-rich Eastern Congo. Rwanda raised objections questioning the court's jurisdiction in the case. Its lawyer, Emile Ntwali, urged for the case to be dismissed since the regional courts does not handle criminal matters. Ntwali also pointed out procedural mistakes, such as Congo's failure to translate court documents into English, the official language of the court. Congo's legal team asked the court to be allowed to submit new evidence and translated documents. Presiding Judge Yohana Masara said the courts would review each side's argument and deliver a ruling on the objections at a later date. New fighting rocked Sudan's capital on Thursday with airstrikes and drone attacks in and around Khartoum amid a worsening cholera outbreak, officials said. Sudan's military launched an operation in the early hours of Thursday aimed at taking control of areas in the capital that had been in the hands of its enemy, the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Sudanese media reported increased military movements and airstrikes in the districts of Khartoum and Omdurman, the heaviest in the capital area in months. Mohamed Ibrahim, the health ministry spokesperson in Khartoum, said in a statement that 4 civilians were killed and 14 others wounded in the latest fighting in the Karari district of Omdurman, a city next to the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. A military spokesman confirmed the operation was underway but declined to comment further. Sudan's military leader, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, has defended the ongoing conflict in Khartoum, stating that the operation is meant to preserve the country's integrity and safety. Burhan, who led in 2021, is close to Egypt's president and former army chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The conflict began in April 2023 when tensions between Burhan's military and Rapid Support Forces paramilitary escalated into street battles. Sudan's conflict and humanitarian crisis have ranked third at the General Assembly, with warring generals causing widespread violence and famine. The United States, European Union, and UN urge for peace and aid to civilians as cholera cases have raised rapidly. Cholera has been declared an outbreak in Sudan, with most cases reported in Kassala. UNICEF is collaborating with the Ministry and World Health Organization to carry out a second round of oral cholera vaccination campaign. The disease is spreading in areas devastated by heavy rainfalls and floods, particularly in eastern Sudan, where millions have been displaced by the conflicts between Sudanese military and the RSF. Thousands of Ethiopians gathered in the capital on Thursday to celebrate an annual religious festival distinguished by the lighting of bonfires according to the beliefs of the local Orthodox Christian faithful. Meskel, a national celebration in Addis Ababa, is a religious holiday in Ethiopia marked by rituals and merriment. Bonfires are lit across the country, with the patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church lighting a large one. The festival celebrates the cross of Jesus and its recovery by Saint Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine. The celebrations continue until Friday, a national holiday for church services and family moments. Meskel has been inscribed by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This year's festival comes at a challenging time for Ethiopia. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is attempting to secure sea access through Somaliland, engineering Somali authorities. Ethiopia is also at odds with Egypt over a large Nile dam, raising tensions in the Horn of Africa. Abiy has also criticized the Orthodox Christian Church for his handling of the Tigray conflict. Meskel, an Ethiopian festival, is expected to bring peace to the country, with a larger celebration expected in Garage Zone. The holiday, which has long held significance, is expected to attract hundreds of thousands of tourists. The celebration is characterized by large bonfires, and many Ethiopians are unable to travel due to security concerns. A family in Addis Ababa has been unable to attend a significant ritual due to the recent pandemic. However, neighbor Lule Tadis mobilized Muslim Sudanese and Syrian refugees to participate in the celebration. The event brings neighbors together, promotes family, and celebrates the best in each other, despite the challenges faced in recent years. World Bank said it's rolling out measures to ensure the recipients of lending to Uganda are not discriminated against by a tough anti-gay law. A World Bank spokesperson said the measures, which include an independent monitoring mechanism to ensure compliance, would apply to ongoing and new projects. Uganda, a mostly conservative country, enacted the Anti-Homosexuality Act in May last year, drawing widespread condemnation from the West and sanctions from the United States. Under the law, those who commit so-called aggravated homosexuality receive the death penalty. The bank suspended all new lending to Uganda last year after finding that the law contradicts its values. The World Bank is one of Uganda's biggest funders, especially of critical infrastructure such as roads and energy. The funding suspension was seen as a significant blow to its finances. The bank said it will not propose any new public financing for Uganda to their board until they are satisfied that mitigation measures are in place. LGBT activists had asked the bank to keep the ban on funding as long as the law remains in force. They said in a statement this week. The World Bank's mitigation measures are a facade designed to provide the illusion of protection, said Richard Lusimbo, a top official at Convening for Equality. Hurricane Helene roared through Florida and into Georgia on Friday as one of the most powerful storms to hit the U.S., with fears of death and widespread destruction in its wake. At least one fatality in Florida was blamed on the hurricane so far, authorities said, as a Category 4 storm made landfall around 11:10 p.m. Eastern Time. Even before its arrival, the storm had caused power outages for over 1 million customers and severe flooding in several areas. Officials feared more fatalities would be discovered on Friday as the storm gusted with 140 mph winds but weakened to 120 kph as it headed north into Georgia. The 7th most powerful to slam into Florida, according to data from the National Hurricane Center. In an overnight update, the NHC said Helene was weakening as it moved quickly northwest near the city of Valdosta in southern Georgia. Life-threatening storm surge winds and heavy rains continue, it said. Rain has wiped parts of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and central and western North Carolina and portions of Tennessee. Atlanta, hundreds of miles north of Florida's Big Bend, where the storm entered, was under a tropical storm warning. In Pinellas County, which sits on a peninsula surrounded by Tampa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico, roads were already filling with water before noon. Officials warn the storm's impact could be as severe as last year's Hurricane Idalia, which flooded 1,500 homes in low-lying coastal county. Videos posted on the county's social media site showed some swamped beachsides, roads, and water rising over both docks. Airports in Tampa, Tallahassee, and St. Petersburg are all suspended operations on Thursday. Helene is expected to remain a full-fledged hurricane as it rolls through the Macon, Georgia area on Friday, forecasters said. It could bring 12 inches of rain or more, potentially devastating the state's cotton and pecan crops, which are in the middle of harvesting season. Helene is expected to dump up to 15 inches of rain in some isolated spots after making landfall in Florida, causing considerable flash and urban flooding, the Hurricane Center said. U.S. state of Alabama has executed Allen Eugene Miller, the second American ever put to death by inhaling nitrogen gas. Miller, 59 years old, was executed for 1999 workplace murders. His execution marks the U.S. fifth in a week, its largest use of capital punishment in over 2 decades. Also, on Thursday, Emmanuel Littlejohn received a lethal injection in Oklahoma after the state's governor denied a last-minute clemency request. Miller's execution marks 18th this year, with 7 more scheduled for 2024. The U.S. has seen its 1,600th execution since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, with Freddie Owens, Marcellus Williams, and Travis Mullis executed. Experts believe the timing is a coincidence due to changes in execution scheduling. Despite 35 states abolishing or not using the death penalty, the number of executions has risen over the past 3 years, with Texas, Missouri, Alabama, and Florida leading the way. Alabama's Supreme Court approved Miller's nitrogen hypoxia execution, a method where inmates inhale nitrogen gas through a mask until they lose oxygen. Alabama is one of 3 states to sanction this form of capital punishment. Critics criticized the execution as painful and inhuman. Attorney General Steve Marshall defended the execution. Oklahoma State Senator John Littlejohn was sentenced to death for a 1992 robbery that led to the murder of convenience store owner Kenneth Mears. His lawyers argued that he was not the shooter and that jurors were confused. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted to spare his life and commute his sentence to life without parole. Governor Kevin Stitt declined to grant the reprieve, stating he had difficulty overturning the decision. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump will meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday after having criticized him on the U.S. campaign trail and expressed doubts the U.S. ally can win its war with Russia. Trump said on Thursday that they would meet at 9:45 a.m. at Trump Tower in Manhattan. Though Trump and Zelensky talked over the phone in July, this will be their first in-person meeting since Trump's 2017 to 2021 term. Zelensky, who is in the United States for the UN General Assembly, met on Thursday with Democratic President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential candidates in the November 5th election. Ukraine's leader, Zelensky, visited a munitions factory in Pennsylvania with Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, a key Harris ally. Biden announced a new military aid package of over $8 billion, while Harris reaffirmed support for Kyiv and accused Trump of failing to stand during Zelensky's stay in the country. Meetings between presidential candidates and foreign leaders have taken place during previous election campaigns. In 2016, Trump and Democratic candidates Hillary Clinton both met leaders of Egypt, Japan, and Ukraine during that year's UN General Assembly. But such encounters are nonetheless sensitive, as the law limits what candidates can say or discuss during such encounters. 7 months after a trial judge fined Donald Trump $454 million for business frauds that the judge said shocked the conscience, a New York appeals court appeared skeptical on Thursday of some of the arguments underpinning the New York Attorney General's case against the former president. A panel of 5 judges at New York's Appellate's Division First Department heard Trump's appeal and peppered both sides with concerns about the case, appearing to question some of the key elements on the state's case, including the application of a consumer fraud statute, the justification for the financial penalty prosecutors sought, and the private nature of the transactions in question, mirroring well-defense arguments that failed during the case's lengthy trial this year. Trump himself did not attend Thursday's hearing in New York. The Supreme Court has ruled that Donald Trump's alleged misstatements were not deceptive, as they were made for sophisticated business actors. The judge's question, Judith Val, emphasized the importance of Trump's financial statements to the banks that loaned him hundreds of millions of dollars. The New York Attorney General's case revolves around the New York Fraud Statute, Executive Law 63, which Trump's lawyers argued should not apply to profitable transactions between financial institutions and the Trump Organization. Associate Justice John R. Higgett questions the Attorney General's jurisdiction, but Attorney General Val argues that Trump's frauds impacted consumers and that the fine has a deterrent effect. Justice Peter Multoon questions the size of the penalty and its connection to limited harm incurred by the banks. The justices defended the fraud statute used in a trial against Trump, arguing it protects honesty and integrity in the marketplace. Judge Arthur N. Gordon fined Trump $454 million for exaggerating his wealth to secure better terms from lenders. Trump secured a $175 million bond while appealing the judgment. Families of the 43 students from a rural teachers' college abducted 10 years ago in southern Mexico marked the painful anniversary on Thursday. Disillusioned after what they say was a decade of unfulfilled government promises. Thousands marched through Mexico's capital demanding answers and justice for missing student of Josivani Guerrero de la Cruz. Father Margarito Guerrero expressed gratitude to those accompanied, including homemaker Lourdes Silva and her daughter, who have been following the family's movement for a decade. The anniversary of the disappearance of students from rural normal school in Ayotzinapa, Mexico, is being celebrated. The students were attacked by a local drug gang in 2014, and their whereabouts remain unknown. The disappearances are among the over 115,000 recorded missing in Mexico, and the president's administration has closed ranks with the generals, causing further distress for the families. Lopez Obrador had promised to solve the misery, but on Wednesday he downplayed, minimized and even pushed back against the findings of his own administration, asserting that those trying to link the military are driven by political interests, according to report. The United Nations Human Rights Office lamented in a statement on Thursday that the unsatisfactory results of authorities, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which sends experts to Mexico to aid in the investigation for 8 years, said in a statement it was worried that investigation had stalled and denounced a pact of silence that has impeded the identification of the perpetrators and those who cover for them. Argentina's poverty rate jumped from almost 42% to 53% during the first 6 months of Javier Milei's presidency, the statistics agency reported. On Thursday, a steep rise reflecting the pain of the country's most intense austerity program in recent memory. The government's finding that Argentina's half-year poverty rate in 2024 had surged to its highest level since 2003. When the country was reeling from catastrophic foreign debt, default and currency devaluation, marks a setback for the far-right economist. So far, foreign investors and the International Monetary Fund, to which Argentina owes $43 billion, have cheered his controversial fiscal shock therapy that has succeeded in pulling down the country's monthly inflation from 25.5% last December to 4.2% in recent months. Argentina's inflation, now running at more than 230% annually, is among the worst in the world, bracing for negative news hours before the poverty report's release. Milei's spokesperson sought to deflect the blow in a lengthy press conference. The government inherited a disastrous situation, Manuel Adoni told reporters, lambasting the decades of unbridled spending under Milei's left-leaning Peronist predecessors that generated chronic inflation. Unlike previous populist governments that kept consumer spending high at the cost of a massive budget deficit, Milei dismantled price controls, cut subsidies on energy and transport, and devalued the peso by 54% in December after taking office. Argentina's president, Nicolas Milei, is aiming for a fiscal surplus of over 1.3% of the country's annual economic output in 2025. His government's austerity measures have reduced the yearly inflation rate from almost 300% to 122.9%. However, economists predict that inflation remains around 4% since July. Further spending cuts are needed to restart public works and boost pensions and wages. You're watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We'll be back after this break. Please do stay with us. Thanks for staying with us as we bring you the broadcast of the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Remember, we are open for advert placements, bookings, and commercials. And you can connect with us and watch us on ATN socials on Facebook and YouTube at Atlantic Television Network, Instagram and TikTok at Atlantic TV Network 1, X formerly Twitter at Atlantic TV Net. Watch us live on our website, atlanticnetwork.tv. And now to the rest of our stories. Haiti has seen nearly 13 people killed on average each day this year, according to data from a United Nations report on Friday, which urged tighter controls on arms trafficking, among other measures, as a gang war drives a worsening humanitarian crisis. A UN High Commissioner for Human Rights report shows 3,451 deaths since January as Haiti's security force for Haitian police expires. The UN has requested a formal peacekeeping mission to secure stable funds and capacity, as only a fraction of promised troops have been deployed. The mission's first deployment in June prompted gangs to recruit large numbers of children into their ranks, the report said. In addition, close to 100 children have been killed so far this year, some in gang attacks and other in police operations, the report said. Violence has spread beyond the capital, fueled by arms trafficking, primarily from the United States, but also from the Dominican Republic and Jamaica, which has persisted despite an international arms embargo. The report said poorly monitored airspaces, coastlines, and porous borders were allowing gangs to obtain high-caliber weapons, drones, boats, and a seemingly endless supply of bullets. The number of people internally displaced by the violence has almost doubled in the last 6 months to over 700,000, while some 1.6 million people are estimated to be facing emergency food insecurity, the worst level before famine. South Korea looks forward to working together with Japan's new cabinet to forge positive ties with its closest neighbor and partner, its foreign ministry said, in comments made after the election of Shigeru Ishiba as leader of Japan's ruling party. President Yoon Suk-yeol has made it a diplomatic priority to improve ties with Tokyo and build trilateral security cooperation together with the United States by putting years of animosity stemming from Japan's wartime history behind. Ishiba is set to become Japan's next prime minister after winning a closely fought contest in its fifth and final attempt to lead the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Before Yoon took office in 2022, relations between the two U.S. regional allies had sunk to the lowest level in decades amid acrimonious diplomatic and trade disputes tied to Japan's 1910 to 1945 colonization of the Korean peninsula. The outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Yoon oversaw a newfound partnership after orchestrating an about-face in ties, prodding by U.S. President Joe Biden. South Korea's Yonhap news agency dubbed Ishiba a dove on the matter of Japan's ties with South Korea, citing past comments that questioned whether Japan had done enough to redress its role in World War II that continues to affect ties with regional neighbors. At least 15 people died in the collapse of an illegal gold mine in Indonesia's province of West Sumatra, following a landslide caused by heavy rains, an official said on Friday. While rescuers are scrambling to locate 7 missing, small-scale and illegal mining has often caused accidents in Indonesia, where mineral resources are located in remote areas in conditions difficult for authorities to regulate. The illegal gold mine in the district of Solok collapsed after a landslide on Thursday evening due to heavy rain, said Irwan Effendi, the head of the provincial disaster agency. Rescuers must trek 8 hours to get to the site, which is inaccessible by road, Irwan told newsmen, adding that the victims are the residents who manually mine for gold. He estimated there were probably 25 people in the mine at the time of the incident, of whom 15 died, while 3 were injured and 7 are missing. Police and military launched a search early on Friday for the missing, along with steps to evacuate the death. A Hong Kong court is set to sentence 2 journalists on Thursday in a landmark sedition case that is widely seen as an indicator of media freedom in a city once known as a beacon of press freedom in Asia. Former editor-in-chief Chung Pui-kyung and Patrick Lam have been convicted of sedition under a colonial-era law in Hong Kong. The news outlet, which criticized authorities during pro-democracy protests in 2019, was one of the last in Hong Kong to do so. They face up to 2 years in prison and a fine of 5,000 Hong Kong dollars. George Kwok Wai King wrote that Stan News was used to incite hatred against the Beijing and Hong Kong governments during the 2019 protests. He ruled that 11 articles published under the leadership of activist Nathan Law and veteran journalist Alan Au and Chan Piu Man carried seditious intent. Shan, who is also Chang's wife, pleaded guilty in the Apple Daily case. Thousands of residents are in line to secure a seat in the courtroom. The trial, which began in October 2022, lasted some 50 days. The verdict was postponed several times for reasons including a wait for an appeal outcome in another landmark sedition case. Their lawyer, Audrey Yu, argued for the pair to be sentenced to up to time served, saying their case was different because they were journalists whose responsibility was to report on the city's situation and different people's views. The pair also stressed their journalistic mission in their mitigation letters. Hong Kong's press freedom has been severely impacted by a rare disease diagnosis and chemotherapy, with Lam and Chung detained for nearly a year. The city's ranking in Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index has dropped from 80 in 2021 to 18 in 2002. An increased self-censorship has led to increased harassment against journalists. South Korea announced plans on Thursday to compensate farmers and others in the country's dwindling dog meat industry before a formal ban goes into effect in 2027. A move that is drawing opposition from both farmers and animal rights activists. South Korea's parliament passed a lawmark bill in January that will ban slaughtering, breeding, or selling dog meat for human consumption after a 3-year grace period. It will be punishable by 2 to 3 years in prison. The Agriculture Ministry said that farmers will receive compensation starting from 225,000 won and rising up to 600,000 won per dog if they agree to shut down their business early. South Korea's ban on dog meat production is likely to be rejected by farmers who argue it infringes on their job rights and worsens their economic struggles. An association of dog farmers has called for an extension of the grace period and compensation plans. Human Society International criticized the plan for potentially increasing dog breeding and causing suffering. South Korea's dog meat industry, a cultural and economic powerhouse, has gained attention due to its industrial-scale dog farms. First Lady Kim Kyung-hee supports a prohibition, but surveys shows around 1 in 3 South Koreans oppose it. Most people now don't eat dog meat. Vice Agricultural Minister Park Beong-soo told reporters that government studies found that about 466,000 dogs are currently being raised for foods across South Korea. He said officials will try to convince farmers to voluntarily phase out dog breeding ahead of the ban. The government plans to adopt remaining dogs, compensate butchers, dismantle dog farms, offer low-interest loans for former farmers and butchers, and provide financial assistance to traders and restaurant owners to find new jobs post-ban. China's Coast Guard said on Friday that the Philippines sent a civilian ship to ferry daily necessities to a warship at a second Thomas Shoal that Beijing says was illegally beached in the disputed waterway of South China Sea. State media quoted the Coast Guard as saying Thursday's trip was in line with the temporary deal between the two countries, a reference to a provisional agreement struck in July after both had repeated altercations near the shore. However, the Philippines say the deal, reached after several run-ins at the shore over the past few months, could be subject to review, following another recent flare-up elsewhere over the South China Sea. In Manila, the Philippine Armed Forces say the resupply mission to the naval ship Syria, Mada, had been supported by the country's Coast Guard. Essential supplies and provisions were delivered, easing the way for troop rotation, it added in a statement, vowing to preserve with its mandates in the West Philippine Sea, providing full support and care for troops stationed there. China claims nearly all the South China Sea, despite overlapping maritime claims by Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines and Vietnam, angering its neighbors. Israel will continue to discuss ceasefire proposals for Lebanon in the days ahead, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Friday, as Washington warned that further escalation would only make it harder for civilians on both sides to return home. Israel Foreign Minister rejected global calls for a ceasefire with Iran-backed Hezbollah group, continuing airstrikes that have killed hundreds in Lebanon and raised regional warfares. Israeli strikes have killed over 600 people in Lebanon since on Monday. Hezbollah claims rockets fired into Israel are a response. Israeli air defense have limited Hezbollah's rockets damage, but the group's attacks have disrupted life in northern Israel. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is the worst in over 18 years and part of the Middle East spillover for the Gaza war. Israeli airstrikes in Syria killed 5 soldiers. The U.S. and France proposed a 21-day truce across the Lebanese-Israeli border, and negotiations continue. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has ordered Israeli troops to continue fighting with full force in Lebanon. Israel's campaign aims to secure the return of tens of thousands of Israelis forced to evacuate areas near the Lebanese border over the last year of hostilities. Hezbollah began firing at Israel on October 8, declaring solidarity with Palestinians, and will only cease fire when Israel's Gaza offensive ends. Over 90,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon this week, adding to over 111,000 already affected by the conflict. Over 30,000 people have crossed into Syria, 80% of them Syrians. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized the importance of reaching an agreement on a 21-day ceasefire across the Israel-Lebanon border, stating that further escalation will make civilian return more difficult. Blinken also discussed efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and improving humanitarian assistance. Supermodel Naomi Campbell has stated that she was not in charge of her charity after being disqualified from her role as a trustee for 5 years due to findings of significant financial mismanagement by the Charity Commission. Campbell addressed reporters to discuss the recent findings of the Charity Commission and expressed her deep concerns, stating that she was not in control of her charity. The supermodel was prohibited from serving as a charity trustee in England and Wales, following a Thursday ruling that criticized the government and financial management of the poverty charity she established nearly 20 years ago. Reports revealed that the organization spent €12,000 on a flight to Nice for the transfer of art and jewelry, in addition to a lavish hotel stay costing €7,800 for the model. 2 other trustees, Bianca Helmich and Veronica Shaw, faced longer bans of 9 years and 4 years, respectively. An inquiry revealed that unauthorized consultancy payments amounting to €290,000 were made to Helmich, violating the charity's constitution. Although Helmich offered to repay the funds, interim managers appointed by the commission ensured that the charity received the repayments. More than 30,000 people, mainly Syrians, crossed into Syria from Lebanon in the past 72 hours. The UN Refugee Agency said on Friday, as the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah intensified. About 80% of the people making the crossing were Syrians and about 20% were Lebanese, said Gonzalo Vegas Loza, the UNHCR's representative in Syria. About half were children and adolescents, and men were making the crossing in smaller numbers than women, he said. They are crossing from a country at war to one that has faced a crisis conflict for 13 years, Vegas Loza told a Geneva press conference, calling it an extremely difficult choice. He also said that they will have to see over the next few days how many more do so. He said the UNHCR had been working with Syria's government and partners to beef up the reception and processing of those who arrive, and that Syria was allowing Lebanese nationals to enter for an unspecified time as long as they had some kind of papers showing the name. Lebanon is home to around 1.5 million Syrians who fled civil war in their own country. Israel's foreign minister has rejected global calls for a ceasefire with the Iran-backed Hezbollah group and expressed with airstrikes that this week has heightened fears of a regional war. The conflict between Israeli forces and the heavily armed Hezbollah is the worst in more than 18 years and part of the regional spillover of the Gaza war. In total, more than 200,000 people in Lebanon have been uprooted by the conflict, the UN humanitarian coordinator in Lebanon told the press conference. Moscow court has begun considering a criminal case against a 72-year-old American accused of fighting as a mercenary for Ukraine, Russia's RIA state news agency reported on Friday. The man, identified as Stephen James Hubbard, was placed in pre-trial detention for 6 months, RIA said. The reports did not specify when or where Hubbard was arrested. Newsman was not immediately able to contact the lawyer. The U.S. Embassy in Russia and the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not immediately reply to messages seeking comment. Charges of mercenary activity carry between 7 and 15 years in prison in Russia. RIA said Hubbard, a native of Michigan, and moved to Ukraine in 2014 and lived for time there with a woman. In a public Facebook group, a woman identified herself as Hubbard's sister said her brother had been kidnapped up in the Ukraine nearly 3 years ago. The woman was not immediately available for comment. Hubbard's next hearing is scheduled for October 3rd, a notice on the court website showed.